One quiet afternoon in the kitchen blurred every boundary, igniting a connection between us that would change everything in ways I never could have anticipated. I'd invited my nephew, Ryan, to stay for a few days. He'd just graduated and was so eager to experience life outside of his parents' house. I thought it would be a good opportunity for him to spend some time here, away from everything familiar. I expected the usual stuff: late-night movies, shared meals, maybe a few conversations about his future. What I didn't expect was the quiet tension that began to grow between us. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was lost in one of my favorite recipes. The sizzle of vegetables in the pan filled the room with a warmth that makes a house feel like a home. I was caught up in the rhythm of chopping and stirring when I noticed Ryan standing in the doorway, watching me with a smile that felt more thoughtful than usual. "Need any help, Uncle?" he asked, his voice soft, curious. "Only if you're ready to take orders," I joked, smiling over my shoulder. He laughed and walked over, his footsteps quiet, almost as if he didn't want to break the spell of the moment. Ryan is tall, lean, with a natural confidence that reminded me of myself at his age. But there was also a depth to him, an intensity one hadn't noticed before. His presence filled the room, and suddenly, I was hyper-aware of his every movement, the way he stood close enough to reach over, to grab a knife, to pass me a dish. I tried to focus on the cooking, but the air between us felt charged with something unspoken. He leaned against the counter. "How do you know when a dish is ready?" "It looks complicated." "Patience," I said, smiling. "The food lets you know when it's ready." He watched me for a moment, his eyes steady, thoughtful. "You're always so calm." "It's like nothing can shake you," he observed, a hint of genuine admiration in his voice. I laughed, a little embarrassed. "Life teaches you that, eventually," I replied, trying to brush it off. But something in his gaze lingered. There was a silent understanding there, a curiosity that went far beyond words. I busied myself with the food, focusing on the familiar task, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Ryan was seeing something deeper in me, something I hadn't shown anyone in a very long time. For the next few minutes, we worked in a comfortable silence, him chopping vegetables, me stirring the pot. But every now and then, I'd catch him looking at me from the corner of my eye, his gaze intense and unwavering. I told myself it was just his way of observing, of learning from someone he looked up to. But a part of me, buried deep beneath layers of habit and routine, felt truly seen, and it was utterly unsettling. The next few days passed in a similar rhythm. Evenings were for old movies, shared laughter, and stories. He'd ask questions about my life, things he'd never thought to ask before, and I found myself opening up, telling him stories from my youth, moments that had shaped me. A closeness was developing, one that felt natural but also completely caught me off guard. One night, as an old action film flickered on the screen, he suddenly turned to me, his face lit only by the TV's glow. "Do you ever wish you'd done things differently?" he asked. His tone was casual, but his eyes were intent. The question surprised me. "Differently how?" "I don't know," he said, shrugging. "Like, different choices. A different life." I took a moment to really think. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But life has a funny way of leading you exactly where you need to go." He nodded, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "I think that's what I'm trying to figure out right now," he said, his voice quiet. The conversation settled between us like a secret, something only we shared. And for a moment, I felt a powerful urge to reach out, to tell him that he didn't have to figure it all out alone, that he could lean on me. But I held back, uncertain of where that powerful feeling was coming from. That night, I lay awake, thinking about our conversation, about the look in his eyes. There was a vulnerability there, a rawness I hadn't expected. It was as if he was searching for an answer he thought I could provide. I felt a strange, fierce protectiveness toward him, a deep desire to help him find his way. The next day, Ryan joined me in the kitchen again. We cooked side by side, exchanging stories and laughter, and I found myself relaxing in his presence, enjoying his company in a way I never had before. As we worked, he reached over to grab a seasoning from the shelf, and his hand brushed against mine. It was a fleeting touch, but it lingered, the warmth of his skin startling me. "Sorry," he said, a bit flustered, his cheeks flushing. "No problem," I replied, forcing a smile and trying to brush off the electric feeling his touch left behind. But it was there, beneath the surface, a subtle, undeniable tension I couldn't ignore. And as the day went on, I found myself watching him, noticing the way he moved, the way he carried himself. I told myself it was just a passing thought, something that would fade. That evening, we sat in the living room as the neighborhood quieted for the night. The air between us felt heavy, charged with something I didn't dare name. I turned to say something, but he was already looking at me, his eyes filled with a quiet intensity. "Uncle," he said softly. "I just want you to know. I really appreciate you. For everything." The sincerity in his voice wrapped around my heart. I felt a warmth spread through me, a sense of closeness I hadn't felt in years. "Your family, Ryan," I replied, my own voice softer than I intended. "I'm always here for you." There was a pause then, a moment of silence that felt profound, as if we were both standing on the edge of something vast and unspoken. And for the first time, I truly wondered if he was feeling the same tension, the same magnetic pull that I was. It was a thought I quickly tried to dismiss, but it lingered, refusing to fade. Over the next few days, the feeling only grew stronger. Every conversation, every shared laugh, every accidental touch seemed to deepen the invisible connection between us. And though I tried to ignore it, to rationalize it away as a fleeting feeling, I couldn't deny that something fundamental had shifted. There was a quiet intensity in Ryan's gaze, a depth that seemed to draw me in, making me question things I hadn't thought about in decades. It was unsettling and thrilling all at once, this feeling of being truly seen by someone else. And as much as I tried to deny it, I knew, deep in my soul, that things would never be the same. Ryan had stirred something in me, something I couldn't explain, something that went far beyond words. I told myself it was just a phase, a fleeting feeling that would fade with time. After all, he was my nephew, and I was his uncle. That's what I kept telling myself. The days continued to pass, each one adding a new layer to the tension, strengthening this unspoken connection that hummed between us. I told myself it was all in my head, that Ryan and I were just close, that he looked up to me. But deep down, I knew there was something different, something real that we weren't talking about. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and long shadows stretched across the walls, we found ourselves in the living room, seated across from each other. It had become our habit, this quiet ritual of watching a movie before bed. But tonight, I sensed something more in the air, something that made my skin prickle with anticipation. Ryan was unusually quiet, his gaze often drifting from the screen to me, his expression completely unreadable. Every so often, he'd shift in his seat, as if he was on the verge of saying something, but stopped himself each time. I tried to focus on the movie, on the storyline unfolding before us, but my attention kept drifting back to him. The space between us felt charged, electric, like the heavy silence right before a summer storm. "What's on your mind, Ryan?" I asked, finally breaking the silence, hoping to bring things back to familiar ground. He hesitated, his fingers tracing the edge of the couch, his gaze fixed on his hands. I just feel like I don't really know what I'm doing with my life," he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. There was a vulnerability there, a raw honesty that caught me completely off guard. I nodded, sensing this was more than a passing worry, this was his heart asking for an anchor. "That's completely normal at your age," I said, my voice softening, trying to offer some comfort. "You don't have to have it all figured out right now." He looked up, and his eyes locked onto mine with a quiet, startling intensity. "But it's more than that," he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite name. "Sometimes I feel lost. Like I don't really know who I am." His words hung in the air between us, and for a moment, I felt a deep, aching pang of empathy, a powerful desire to soothe him, to make him feel understood. I reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder, offering a gentle, reassuring squeeze. "You're not alone, Ryan. We all feel that way sometimes." For a moment, he seemed to relax under my touch, his gaze softening as he looked at me. But then his expression shifted again, his brows furrowing as if he was battling an internal storm. "Do you ever feel like there's something missing?" he asked, his voice low and hesitant, almost afraid of my answer. The question hit me right in the chest. I thought about the quiet moments in my own life, the quiet ache of a longing I could never quite name. I nodded slowly. "Yeah. Sometimes. I think everyone does." He took a shaky breath, and then his hand came up, covering mine. His touch was warm against my skin, sending a jolt straight through me. I don't want to feel so alone anymore," he whispered, his voice so quiet I felt it more than heard it. The air between us grew thick, filled with a tension so potent it made my heart hammer against my ribs. I wanted to say something, anything, to ease the worry in his eyes, but the words were trapped in my throat. All I could feel was the weight of his hand on mine, the warmth spreading up my arm, pulling me in. And before I knew what I was doing, I was leaning closer, my hand still on his shoulder, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. He didn't move. He didn't pull away. Instead, he held my gaze, his eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and something deeper, something profound that made my breath catch in my throat. A soft knock on the door shattered the moment, breaking the spell. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned, clearing my throat and forcing a smile that felt painfully unnatural. "I'll get that," I said, my voice sounding strained and foreign. As I walked to the door, I tried to shake off the lingering sensation, the ghost of his hand on mine, the dizzying intensity in his eyes. I told myself it was just a moment of shared vulnerability, that I'd imagined the deeper meaning. But as I took the food from the delivery driver, my mind was 1,000 miles away, still locked in that living room, still lost in his gaze. When I returned, he was standing by the window, his back to me, his posture rigid. He didn't turn around as I entered, and a sharp pang of guilt shot through me, as if I'd crossed a line I never even saw. "I ordered us some food," I said, trying to keep my tone light and normal. "Hope you're hungry." He just nodded, still not facing me. "Thanks," he said, his voice quiet, distant. I set the food down on the table, a strange and heavy discomfort settling in the pit of my stomach. I tried to brush it off, to convince myself it was all in my head, but the unspoken tension between us lingered, hanging in the air like a weight, pressing down on my chest. That night, after Ryan had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't escape. I kept replaying that moment over and over, the way his hand had covered mine, the look in his eyes, the magnetic pull that had drawn me in. I wanted to convince myself it was nothing, just a fleeting moment of connection. But a part of me, a part one was deeply afraid of, knew I couldn't just let it go. Like a weight pressing down on my chest. That night, after Ryan had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't escape. I kept replaying the moment over and over, the way his hand had covered mine, the look in his eyes, the unspoken connection that had passed between us. I wanted to convince myself it was nothing, that it was just a fleeting moment of vulnerability. But a part of me, a part one was deeply afraid of, knew I couldn't just let it go. The next morning, I was up early, hoping the daylight would shake off the strange feeling that had settled in my chest. I busied myself with breakfast, trying to lose myself in the familiar, comforting routine of cooking. But when Ryan came downstairs, I felt my pulse quicken, the tension from the night before flooding back in an instant. He greeted me with a quiet smile, his expression guarded, as if he, too, was unsure how to act. We ate in a silence that felt heavy, thick with all the words we weren't saying. I tried to focus on my food, to pretend everything was normal, but I could feel his gaze on me, a constant, undeniable weight. After breakfast, I suggested we go for a walk, hoping the fresh air and open space would clear the strange tension between us. He agreed, and we set off down the quiet neighborhood streets, the sound of birdsong filling the air. For a while, we walked in a comfortable quiet, both of us lost in our own thoughts. But eventually, he spoke up, his voice hesitant. "Uncle," he began, his tone uncertain. "About last night." I felt my heart skip a beat, but I kept my expression neutral, a protective wall going up. "It's okay, Ryan," I said quickly, hoping to put his mind at ease. "We all have moments where we feel a little lost. You don't have to explain." He shook his head, stopping in his tracks. His gaze was intense as he looked at me. "No, it's not that," he said, his voice filled with a determination I hadn't seen before. I don't know. I just feel like there's something I can't talk about. Something I can't put into words." I turned to face him, feeling a strange mix of empathy and a nervous curiosity. "You can talk to me, Ryan," I said softly. "Whatever it is. You don't have to carry it alone." For a moment, he just looked at me, his expression filled with a kind of longing, a vulnerability that made my chest ache. I reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder, offering a gentle, reassuring squeeze. He held my gaze, his eyes searching mine, and in that moment, I felt something undeniable shift between us. Without a word, he stepped closer, his face inches from mine, his gaze intense and unwavering. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the world around us fading into a blur as we stood there, caught in a moment that felt both surreal and completely inevitable. "I just don't want to feel alone anymore," he whispered, his voice filled with a quiet desperation that shattered my defenses. I felt a rush of emotions I couldn't name, a profound desire to comfort him, to make him feel safe and seen. I tightened my grip on his shoulder. "You're not alone, Ryan," I said, my own voice barely a whisper. "I'm here." He nodded, but didn't move, his gaze still locked on mine. I could feel the warmth radiating from him, the unspoken connection between us growing stronger with each passing second. And for a brief, terrifying moment, I allowed myself to wonder if this was more than just a fleeting feeling. But before I could say anything else, he stepped back, a conflicted, almost pained look in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to. I shook my head, offering what I hoped was a reassuring smile. "It's okay, Ryan," I said gently. "You don't have to apologize." He nodded, but his expression remained troubled, as if he was grappling with something he couldn't quite understand. I wanted to reach out, to tell him that everything would be okay, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, we stood there in silence, the tension between us lingering, unspoken but utterly undeniable. And as we walked back to the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had crossed an invisible line, one we could never uncross. The unspoken tension had grown, settling between us like a permanent shadow, something we couldn't ignore no matter how hard we tried. The next few days felt like walking on a tightrope. Every glance, every accidental touch, seemed to deepen the unspoken connection between us. We were both careful, guarded, as though afraid of disturbing the delicate balance we'd somehow created. One evening, while I was tidying up the kitchen after dinner, Ryan appeared in the doorway. He leaned against the frame, watching me with an expression I couldn't read, his eyes were soft, but held a deep intensity. I felt my heart skip a beat, a strange warmth spreading through my chest. Something about the way he looked at me felt different. Closer. More intimate. "You seem lost in thought," he said, his voice gentle. I shrugged, forcing a casual smile. "Just thinking about life, I guess. It has a way of surprising you when you least expect it." Ryan took a step forward, closing the distance between us. "I know the feeling," he replied, his tone quiet, almost contemplative. He moved beside me, taking a towel and helping me dry the dishes without another word. There was a strange comfort in the silence, a feeling of closeness I couldn't quite explain. The familiar tasks seemed to flow more naturally with him there, as though we were in sync in a way that went beyond words. At one point, our hands brushed, and I felt a surge of warmth spread up my arm, an electric current that made my heart race. I expected him to pull away, to pretend it was just an accident. But he didn't. Instead, he looked up, his gaze meeting mine with a quiet intensity that made the air between us feel thick, charged with something I couldn't name. "You're important to me," he said softly, his eyes searching mine. "More than I think you realize." I felt a pang of emotion, a deep warmth that spread through my chest and settled there, filling empty spaces I hadn't even known existed. I wanted to say something, to express the profound connection I felt, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the bond we shared. After a moment, he turned away, setting the towel down and heading toward the living room. I followed, my mind still reeling from the quiet intensity of his words. We settled onto the couch, the familiar hum of the TV filling the silence between us. But tonight, the usual comfort of our evening ritual felt different. Closer. More intimate. The room was dim, the only light coming from the screen, casting soft shadows across his face. I found myself watching him, noticing the way his expression softened in the glow, the way he seemed to relax into the comfort of our unspoken connection. After a while, he turned to me, his expression thoughtful. "Have you ever felt like you were searching for something, but didn't know what it was?" The question took me off guard. I looked at him, caught by the quiet vulnerability in his gaze. "Yes," I replied, my voice soft. "I think everyone feels that way sometimes." He nodded, his gaze never leaving mine. I feel like there's something here. Something I can't ignore." My heart skipped a beat, a mixture of anticipation and fear swirling in my chest. I didn't know how to respond, didn't know how to navigate the unfamiliar territory we seemed to be treading. But before I could say anything, he leaned closer, his face inches from mine, his gaze intense and unwavering. For a brief, suspended moment, we were frozen, caught in a moment that felt both surreal and utterly inevitable. His breath was warm and steady against my skin, my heart pounding in my chest as the tension between us grew almost unbearable. Then, slowly, he leaned in. His lips brushed against mine in a gentle, hesitant kiss. It was soft. Tentative. A question. And instead of pulling away, I felt myself responding, my body moving on its own accord, drawn to him in a way I could no longer deny, could no longer explain. The kiss deepened, growing more confident, and I felt a rush of warmth spreading through me, a sense of rightness that filled every corner of my being. His hands moved to my shoulders, steadying me, and I melted into the moment, letting go of every last reservation that had held me back for so long. We couldn't control ourselves. Everything that happened between us felt inevitable. Our bodies met, wrapping around each other, melting into the emotions that swirled between us. For those few, fleeting seconds, nothing else existed but the warmth of his touch, the softness of his lips, the quiet intensity that bound us together. It was a feeling unlike anything I'd ever experienced, a mixture of pure comfort and exhilarating fear, a sense of belonging that went far beyond words. When we finally pulled away, he looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of wonder and deep uncertainty. I could see the questions in his gaze, the silent hesitation that mirrored my own. "We probably shouldn't have done that," I murmured, my voice shaky, though a part of me didn't believe a single word. He looked down, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe," he replied quietly. But it didn't feel wrong. A heavy, thick silence fell, filled with the immense weight of everything left unsaid. I wanted to argue, to insist that we should stop, that we were treading on dangerous ground. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself reaching out, my hand covering his in a silent gesture of reassurance. We sat there in the quiet, the warmth of his hand beneath mine a steady comfort, a tangible reminder of the profound bond we shared. I knew we were walking a fine line, crossing boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. But I couldn't bring myself to pull away. Not now. Not after everything we'd shared. After a moment, he spoke, his voice soft but clear. I don't want to lose this. Whatever this is. I don't want to feel alone anymore. His words struck a chord deep within me, stirring feelings I hadn't acknowledged, emotions I'd locked away for years. I tightened my grip on his hand, my heart aching with a strange, powerful mix of fear and longing. You're not alone, Ryan, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I'm here. He nodded, his gaze softening, a hint of relief crossing his face. We sat there in silence, our hands intertwined, the quiet understanding between us a steady anchor in the midst of the swirling uncertainty. For the rest of the evening, we stayed close, neither of us daring to speak, afraid that words might shatter the fragile, beautiful connection we'd built. The silence was comfortable, filled with the unspoken promises we hadn't yet voiced. When he finally stood to head upstairs, he paused, his gaze meeting mine. Good night, he murmured, his voice soft. Good night, I replied, my heart heavy with emotions I couldn't possibly name. As I watched him disappear down the hallway, a part of me knew, with absolute certainty, that nothing would ever be the same again. We'd crossed a line, one we could never uncross. And I wasn't sure what the future held. But for the first time in a very long time, I felt a strange sense of peace. A feeling of belonging that went beyond anything I'd ever known. The next morning, an unusual quietness settled over the house. I awoke early, my mind still buzzing with thoughts from the night before. Memories of the kiss, of his touch, of the warmth we'd shared, lingered, filling my thoughts with a mixture of wonder and deep unease. I knew we were navigating dangerous ground, that we had crossed into something fragile and complex. But I also knew that I couldn't ignore what had happened. Pretending it didn't exist felt impossible. I found Ryan in the kitchen, already awake, staring out the window as if lost in thought. The early morning light cast a soft glow across his face, highlighting the gentle lines of his expression, the quiet intensity in his gaze. He didn't seem to notice me at first, so absorbed in his own thoughts. Morning, I said finally, my voice soft. He turned, his eyes meeting mine with a look I couldn't quite decipher. Morning, he replied, a faint, gentle smile playing at the corners of his lips. There was a warmth in his gaze, a quiet reassurance that settled some of my unease, though I could still feel the weight of everything left unsaid lingering between us. We shared a simple breakfast, the silence comfortable, though neither of us mentioned the night before. But as we sat across from each other, I could feel the unspoken bond between us, the quiet understanding that needed no words. For a while, it was enough. We fell into a gentle rhythm, sharing small smiles and lingering glances, a silent acknowledgement of the connection we couldn't deny. The rest of the day passed in much the same way. We found ways to fill the time, chores around the house, a walk around the neighborhood, simple conversations about the future. It was a strange feeling, balancing on the edge of something so profound, yet feeling a sense of peace in each other's presence, as if we had discovered a part of ourselves we hadn't known was missing. But as evening approached, a sense of finality settled over me. I knew that we couldn't continue like this, that eventually we would have to face reality, to confront the consequences of our choices. The thought made my chest ache, a quiet sadness settling in the pit of my stomach. I didn't want to lose this. I didn't want to lose him. But I knew that we couldn't keep living in this fragile bubble forever. That night, as we sat together in the living room, a comfortable silence filling the space between us, he turned to me, his gaze filled with a quiet determination. Uncle, he began, his voice steady. I don't know what happens next. But I know that I don't want to lose what we have. I looked at him, feeling a mixture of pride and profound sadness, knowing that he, too, was struggling with the same questions, the same doubts. Ryan, I began, my voice soft but steady. Whatever happens, you'll never be alone. You'll always have me in your life. He nodded, a small, grateful smile crossing his face. But I could see the sadness in his eyes, the unspoken understanding that this moment, this fragile connection, couldn't last forever. We were both walking a line, balancing on the edge of something that could easily fall apart. But neither of us was ready to let go. For a moment, we sat in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts, wrestling with the emotions we hadn't allowed ourselves to feel. And then, almost instinctively, he reached out, his hand covering mine in a gesture of quiet reassurance. I felt a warmth spread through me, a sense of comfort in his touch, a silent promise that no matter what happened, we would always be there for each other. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible but filled with a quiet intensity that made my heart ache. I gave his hand a gentle squeeze, a silent acknowledgement of everything we couldn't say, everything we couldn't put into words. We stayed like that for a while, the warmth of his hand in mine a steady anchor in the midst of the uncertainty, a reminder of the bond we shared, the connection that went beyond words. Eventually, he let go, standing up to head to bed, a soft smile on his lips as he wished me good night. I watched him disappear down the hallway, a mixture of emotions swirling in my chest, a quiet sadness settling over me as I realized that this chapter was coming to an end. That night, as I lay in bed, memories of the past few days flooded my mind, the quiet moments, the shared smiles, the unspoken promises. I knew that we had shared something unique, something that had changed both of us. But I also knew that we couldn't stay in this place forever. Life would move on. Time would pass. And eventually, we would have to face the reality of our choices. In the days that followed, Ryan grew quieter, more introspective, as though he, too, was coming to terms with the end of something beautiful and fleeting. We continued our routines, sharing meals, taking walks, spending quiet evenings together. But there was a new sense of distance between us, a gentle understanding that we were both preparing to let go. On his last night at the house, we sat together in the living room, the silence filled with a sense of nostalgia, a quiet acknowledgement of everything we had shared. He turned to me, his expression soft, a hint of sadness in his gaze. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice filled with a deep sincerity. "For everything. For being here. For understanding." I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat and an ache in my chest as I realized that this was truly goodbye. "You'll always have a place here, Ryan," I replied, my voice steady, though I could feel the weight of emotion pressing down on me. "No matter where life takes you, you'll always be family." He gave a small, grateful smile, a glimmer of relief crossing his face. Then he reached out, pulling me into a hug. It was a simple gesture, but it felt profound, a silent expression of everything we couldn't say. We held each other for a moment, the warmth of his embrace a steady comfort, a final reminder of the bond we shared. And then, slowly, he pulled away, his gaze meeting mine one last time. "Goodbye, Uncle," he murmured, his voice soft, filled with a quiet sadness that mirrored my own. "Goodbye, Ryan," I replied, my voice steady, though my heart felt heavy with the weight of everything left unsaid. As he walked out the door, I felt a deep sense of loss settle over me, a quiet sadness I couldn't quite explain. But beneath the sadness, there was also a sense of peace, a quiet understanding that we had shared something unique, something that had changed both of us in ways we couldn't yet understand. For a long time after he left, I sat alone in the quiet house, memories of our time together filling the empty spaces. I thought about the unspoken promises, the quiet moments, the shared smiles. And I realized that, in some way, we had both found something we hadn't known we were searching for. We had found a connection, a sense of belonging, a bond that went beyond the boundaries of family, a quiet understanding that would stay with us, even as life moved on. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself reflecting on our time together. And though we had gone our separate ways, though life had moved on, I knew that the memory of those moments, the quiet connection we had shared, would stay with me. A gentle reminder of the fleeting beauty of life, of the connections that shape us and change us in ways we can't always understand. In the end, I realized that our time together, however brief, had left a lasting impact, a quiet mark on my heart that would stay with me for the rest of my life. And as I moved forward, carrying the memory of those days with me, I felt a sense of peace, a quiet contentment in knowing that, in some way, he would always be a part of me. A part of my story. A part of my life that would never, ever truly fade.